Todd, how you doing?
Hi, David. I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. Hey, thank you for joining us today on the podcast show. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Of course, my pleasure. I thought it would be fun for listeners we'll start with something light. I thought it would be fun to kind of just hear what you've been up to today and how you've spent parts of your day leading up to this show.
Yeah, well, I guess it's not a happy story in a way. I've been kind of whining and crying about hurting my feet playing squash last night. Kind of I'm limping around today. I'm sure I'll be fine soon, but I'm kind of bitter about it.
What happened? I hear you had the lead going into the fifth,
I was playing this match, and I was up 9-6 in the fifth game, and I was about to win. And then on this point, somehow I hurt both my feet at the same time. I strained an Achilles on one side, and I hurt my ankle on the other side, and then I just kind of lost 5 points in a row and lost the match and walked away limping. Still a little bitter about it.
I love it.
Back the podcast today.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't, but in some ways I think it's both ironic and also fitting. You were playing a game, which is kind of what we're going to talk about here, and also you hurt yourself, which you're kind of basically an expert in teaching people about pain and injuries and so forth. So I think it's almost ironic and also perfect.
Good.
Awesome. Todd, real quick before we dive into your background, can you just encapsulate in your own words what health means to you, or what you think it means to be healthy?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, one way to think about health, I mean, the way it's classically defined, or one way of looking at it, is the absence of disease. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like your classic biomedical reductionist way of looking at health. And then people weren't that satisfied with that. It's not that satisfying of a way to look at it. So you go to your doctor, you're not feeling great, you're not in a good mood, you're not maybe that fit, you don't feel that good in your body, and he checks you all out and he says, well, you're perfectly healthy. So that's not the best way to look at health. To have a broader understanding of health, you need to include a bunch of kind of positive things, like the ability to do what you want to do physically and feel good while doing it. Those things are subjective and hard to define, so it's kind of hard to include those in a real kind of biomedical objective definition of health. But we need to include those kinds of things in our conception of health. And it's pretty intuitive, but those things tend to get swept aside a little bit when we rely too much on objective definitions and categories in determining what's healthy and what's not.
I love that. Yeah. So basically being able to have the energy and also the ability to do things we want to do. And also if something doesn't go our way, maybe how resilient we are, or how quickly we bounce back to our kind of usual way of being, maybe.
Yeah, resilience is kind of a big aspect of health that is probably underrated, because in this world we're always meeting challenges and being under stress and encountering variable conditions. So like being very robust and resilient and able to handle that kind of stuff and roll with the punches is very important. And sometimes we tend to think of physical health as, having some great accomplishment in one specific area, like getting in a lot of push-ups or running a mile in a certain time, or being really excellent in one objective measurement of physical health. And then what gets lost is this kind of more general appreciation that you can handle many, many different situations.
Awesome. Can you talk about your background, Todd? Where you came from, how that's led you to where you are, both professionally and philosophically, and then maybe why you're such a great person to listen to when it comes to health and play and movement.
Yeah, well, I grew up playing a lot of sports. I played tennis and soccer and stuff like that, and kind of doing a wide variety of sports was a big part of my childhood. But I wasn't that interested in it in terms of being geeked out on it like I eventually became. When I went to college, I got to a pool table and somehow just got obsessed with playing pool and very interested with the idea of improving and perfecting the whole thing and kind of studying it in a rational way and applying scientific principles to getting better at that activity. And I eventually started doing that with golf and squash when I took up that and other things. So just the idea of applying scientific principles to getting better at physical function, I just found really fascinating and kind of geeked out on it and started reading books by like Gray Cook and Mike Boyle and the functional training guys about that kind of thing. And then at the same time, when I was an attorney, I was experiencing some chronic pain, going to the physical therapist, not getting good results, finding out that this is a really hard problem to solve, and then also getting pushed in that same direction of, hey, what does this have to do with movement or posture or movement quality? And I found myself reading kind of the same people like Gray Cook. And so I just became really interested in the idea of, you know, how the way you move and the way you feel in your body affects your general health and your performance and all this kind of stuff. I eventually quit the law and got into Rolfing, which is a kind of a deep tissue massage, and then studied the Feldenkrais method, which is like a method of movement education, teaching people how to be more efficient. I started seeing clients to help them kind of move better and feel better, and then I wrote a blog, and then I wrote some books, and so I've just been kind of on this pathway for about 20 years now.
Got it. And now here we are, and you're a guy. I'm reading your books. It seems like almost every day I'm tapping into your book for something that I think of and I'm reminded of that you wrote and I read. But just what an incredible resource. And one thing I've greatly admired over the years in your books and in your blog is like you make things, because this whole issue of play, but movement in particular and life, it's so complex. It's such right. It's always changing and it's in flux. It's just such a complex thing. And you seem to at least be able to analogously or some other way, like make it a little bit simpler and easier to digest, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm trying to do is take complex things and make them more simple and actionable without disrespecting the complexity of the subject matter. I think it's kind of one of the weird things about when you really respect the complexity of a certain problem you're trying to solve related to your health or related to your movement or something like that, it can actually push you in the direction of a more simple approach to getting better at that thing. For example, to get better at a sport, when you really appreciate how incredibly complex it is to be able to move, it kind of makes you realize that the best way to do it is just play.
Can you say that the sport again? It kind of cut out.
Oh, I cut out a little bit. Well, I was talking about in getting better at any sport, the most effective thing to do is just play the sport.
Yeah.
The more we recognize the complexity of what's involved in actually playing a sport well, we realize that it's actually very hard to kind of break these complex movements down into simple parts and teach people techniques with all these kind of rote methods and repetitive drills. And the best approach is sometimes just play the game.
Yeah.
We tend to forget that when we overcomplicate things.
I love that. And it takes us right seamlessly almost into kind of my next idea, and it's this play is really what I want to talk about. And so play, it's so linked to a good life, I feel like, intuitively and through experience, and it just seems that way to me the more I read philosophers and movement people and people who are human development people. And it just seems so integrally linked to a good life and a healthy life. Can you talk a little bit?
Yeah, so there are some scientists that study the behavior of play in animals and kids, and they get curious about it because, you know, you go out in the wild and you see animals engaged in these physically taxing and sometimes dangerous activities that don't have any obvious purpose related to survival or procreation. So animals are chasing each other around, they're wrestling. They're wasting calories, but they're not getting food. Sometimes, you know, when seals are playing on the beach, they're more likely to get eaten by killer whales. So why are they doing this? And the supposition is this must be a behavior that is useful to them in some way. And what they suspect is that play is good at training up animals to have physical skills and be physically healthy, teach them social skills, stuff like that. This is super obvious when you look at kids developing as well. So kids learn how to move. They go through this incredible development in their movement education from age 0 to 5 without any coaching at all, without any directions, without following instructions from coaches. When they're learning to roll over, there's no one there saying you need to fire your core a little bit better or activate your serratus to roll over better. Right. They learn it just by curious exploration and playing around. You see some of the best athletes in the world developed their skills in really unstructured environments. Some of the best technically skilled athletes, let's say in soccer, come from a really play-based culture in Brazil where they're just out playing on the street without coaching. The best baseball players in the world right now are coming from the Dominican Republic. You see kids out playing in unstructured environments there. Great basketball players, the most creative and skilled ones, often get their skills in pickup games. So we should be very curious about the benefits of moving in a way that's self-motivated, exploratory, non-directed, non-structured. It's very helpful to get some coaching as well, especially when you get a little bit older. Do some drills, get some specific coaching, take some instructions. You're going to need to do that to get to the highest level, but play provides this incredible basis for getting that job done, and it tends to get neglected or pushed aside when we get too scientific about things and want to coach the hell out of everything and structure everything. Yeah. You can see that with early sports specialization is a good example. Too much work, not enough play.
Yeah, it struck me, not just sports with kids, like getting in the way with specific instruction for sports, but just in general, I feel like we just get in the way too much.
Schooling and lots of things. So I've heard the idea that you should, as a parent, you should think more like a gardener than an engineer. So you can't engineer everything for your kid, but you can put them in the right environment and give them the right motivations and the right goals and the right safety. And in that environment, they grow in the right direction. And you can try to guide that, but you cannot overly engineer that. And if you do, you'll kind of interfere with the self-organization processes that create good outcomes. And that's true for teaching students. It's true for many things.
Yeah, I love that. And I look at it almost like maybe a better word is like facilitator or that we're facilitating. Now, I mean, it sounds like you really got to read the situation and it's context specific and it's always going to change and we just got to be in tune with what's happening. But are there any like tangible ways that parents can get better at facilitating this for like a young person?
Well, I think what you said about, paying attention to the individual and the context. I mean, we have a lot of common sense about these things. Everyone some you can kind of tune into people and figure out what they need as parents. If you were a world-class expert in parenting and you wanted to apply some rigid system to your kid to make them the perfect kid, that might provide you some advantages over just good, common sense, loving parenting within the context of, whatever culture you're in. Or it might not. There's always going to be unpredictable things going on, and someone with people skills who's really listening to the person that they're trying to help and just trying their best is going to get good results in a wide variety of ways. That's not true with all kinds of ways of helping people. You're not going to help someone you're not going to perform heart surgery on someone successfully just by being a caring, empathetic person. You need a very specific set of highly technical skills in order to get that done. You have to be an expert.
Yeah.
You don't have to be a trained expert to be a good parent or to be someone that can take care of your own body. These are kind of common sense things. If we keep things simple and use experts where necessary, we can get a lot done. But we shouldn't overcomplicate things. It's not rocket science.
I love it. And in that sense, too, the experience is really our main teacher. And even with something like heart surgery, like the experience of doing it, of exploring it, of trying it, of being part of that. I mean, that's
you don't want too much trial and error there. It shouldn't be too much of a trial and error process, hopefully. But I get you.
So you mentioned at one point, Todd, risky play.
Yeah,
and you gave a beautiful example of sea life or someone on the beach, an animal on the beach, playing around when they might get eaten. But what are some other examples of risky play, particularly in humans, and why this is so critical that we let them play risky?
Yeah. So when you are engaging in any kind of rough and tumble play, there's little risks there. There's a risk that you'll kind of fall down and skin your knee. When you're a kid, you're running around. Kids fall all the time when they're running. They do a lot of jumping. They They can get little bumps and bruises and scrapes when they do these things. And these things are not going to kill you, but they're going to give you valuable information about when you're safe, when you're moving, and when you're not. I mean, in real life, you're going to have to engage in some vigorous activities, especially if you're out in the wild and you're an animal, and you want to know what your limits are. You want to know how fast is too fast, how high is too high to climb, that kind of stuff. It's not a good outcome for a kid to climb a tree and break an arm, probably, but it is a good outcome for them to go up there and start asking themselves, am I safe in this condition? It develops self-reliance. It develops confidence. It's an education in what's safe and what's not safe. So when kids start out, their play risks little minor injuries, right? Like little bumps and bruises and scrapes and stuff like that. As they get older, they start getting involved in more dangerous things, and skateboarding, surfing, rock climbing, tackle football, that kind of stuff. Now you're really pushing the limits and getting a real education in this kind of thing. You're learning the difference between injuries that you just play through and which ones you stop and get a doctor. So if you've ever played soccer or any kind of field sport, you fall all the time. Yeah. Every time you fall, you have to ask yourself, am I supposed to get up and start running again? Or am I supposed to get off the field? And when you first start playing sports, you don't know. I just started coaching my girl playing soccer, and all the girls on the team had never played before, and they'd fallen down before. They knew what that was about. Yeah. But the first time they get hit with the soccer ball, it hits them in the arm or something, or hits them flat in the leg. And they look at it, and they're like, that's weird. and then they start crying, and they come off the field. And then we said, that's okay. This is something that happens in soccer, but it only happens once, and then they're done. And now they move on to being able to deal with that weird, novel feeling. It's just a feeling. And so as you're playing, as you're taking on risks, you're always learning and gaining confidence. And in our society that's got this safety culture with helicopter parenting, and you're bubble wrapping the kids, and there's a lot of people worried, you're developing fragility in the kids. You're not letting them learn for themselves. You're not letting them take risks and develop the kind of resilience they need. You probably have seen that yourself.
I have, and my wife and I have a 3-year-old, and all this stuff is just so fascinating to me to think about. And the thing that struck me when you were talking about like a high school or college football player, and they learn to test the limits in certain ways. And I imagine someone at that age who's testing the limits is so much smarter about how they test the limits if they were allowed as a younger version of themselves to really be involved in risky play, because then they've been building incrementally this sense of self, this confidence, and it's kind of a growing thing. I don't know. Yeah. It seems to me.
Yeah. I mean, and it's hard to know where to draw the line. I'm not saying it's easy to figure it out. I mean, like playing tackle football. I don't have a son. Would I let him do that? I don't know. It's kind of a dangerous thing, climbing high trees. I watch my kids climb on trees and think, oh, I should let them do this. But I think, what if they fall? So it's not easy, but there are balances, there are trade-offs, and as a culture, we are putting the trade-off too much in favor of safety and not acknowledging the benefits of mildly risky activities.
Yeah, I love that. I tend to agree with that. So I appreciate you saying that. I like that. Hey, Todd, one of the things that struck me in your book, Better Movement, and just reading your blog throughout the years, you oftentimes have like practical, easy to learn, easy to understand, like meditation, like movement meditations, or like little lessons that someone can learn and apply in a way that if they make it habit, it can they can really start to understand themselves better and maybe be healthier and happier. Do you care to maybe give a couple meditations, or maybe one, if you can think of any off the top of your head?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean by meditation. In my book, I've got a lot of awareness through movement lessons, which are short Feldenkrais lessons. So Feldenkrais is a way of teaching people how to move with more efficiency, and one of the ways he did it was have people go through a sequence of movement, all oriented around a particular theme. So there'd be a bunch, like maybe one lesson would be about reaching, and you're reaching. very slowly at one angle and then another angle, and one while inhaling and then one while exhaling. Yeah. And you're kind of like mindfully noticing how they feel and how effortful they are and stuff like that. So these lessons cover all sorts of things: squatting and reaching and bending and twisting and stuff like that. One that I do almost every day is like variable squatting.
Okay.
So as part of like a warm up for squash or anything I do, I've got a bunch of squatting and lunging type movements in it. And what I do is I basically just perform some sort of a squatting movement with some sort of a specific intention, like maybe lowering my butt to touch a bench. And I'll do that 1 or 2 times with my feet in one orientation, and then I'll change my feet to a slightly different orientation and then try to still hit the target. Or I'll make the target lower or more to the left or more to the back of me, or I'll make the target more about reaching with my hand to the floor. Yeah. And I'll keep just moving around my feet to different positions so that I'm playing with lots of different options. It's kind of different than repetitively going through the same exact movement over and over again, and each time trying to perfect it and make it perfect and ideal, like conforming to this ideal stereotype.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah. So I prefer to move in a way that's variable, like doing the same basic thing but different, whether that's a squat, whether that's a lunge, like hang from a bar at different angles, do pull-ups at different angles.
Awesome. I think it's really cool that you launched into the whole squatting thing, and I'll tell you specifically kind of where my question came from. You had basically what you're saying, like a squat awareness through movement lesson that you outlined in Better Movement. And I first read it probably 5 years ago, and I have since, I call it squatation, because to me it's like a meditation in a squat. And so I've since, and I probably almost every other day I tap into some kind of, and I've come up with, and you talked about doing it in a variable way each time, and I've probably come up with thousands of variations based on that one lesson you had in Better Movement on getting to know yourself better in a squat. And much like you, like I'll do it before I do some heavy squatting with a bar or a kettlebell, or I'll do it when I get out of a car after a long car ride, or I use it all the time as a way to, I just feel better. And I feel like I know myself better after I do one of those little lessons.
Yeah. Well, I heard this said recently by a couple people. One was Franz Bosch, and another was oh shoot, now I'm forgetting his name. Who's the powerlifting coach? I'm forgetting his name, but it'll come to me in a minute.
What's that barbell guy?
Movements a lot of different ways. Your body's not that interested in learning movements. Did I just cut out right there?
Yeah, you cut out. Say the name again.
Oh, yeah. So basically what these guys are saying is that a movement is really valuable if there's many, many, many different ways to do it. Your body likes learning movements that can be varied in many, many, many different ways. That means it's going to be a very, very useful movement. So squatting is definitely that kind of movement. You can squat in many, many different ways, and if you explore them all, you'll just kind of really develop that fundamental really well. So any movement that can be done lots of different ways, that's probably a good one to do.
It's interesting because you say that the body, the brain responds really well to those types of things that are quite useful. And I'll give you an example that struck me over the years as just interesting, I guess. So before I read Better Movement and got into your work, and also Paul Ingram and Moshe Feldenkrais, I think actually I first heard the name Moshe Feldenkrais through your blog. And then I dove into Moshe's work quite a bit. But this example, I wanted to learn how to squat deeper for a long time. And I got into Kelly Starrett, who seems to me to be more of a structurally oriented practitioner. And what impressed me, so impressed me at first because he talks, great about things, and he's I don't know, he's captivating. So it struck me. I practiced a lot of his things. I tried to learn how to squat deeper, and and nothing really ever worked that well. And then I heard about you. I heard about Moshe Feldenkrais. I started exploring your guys' work, And it almost seemed like overnight, within a matter of a couple of weeks, I was squatting 3 or 4 inches deeper than I ever had before.
Really?
And
Was that with your feet in a different position than it was before? I mean,
no,
I'm just wondering if that's what accounts for it, because
no, yeah.
yeah, I think what Kelly would recommend about squatting is he'd be pretty prescriptive about, this is an ideal form, and I want you to conform to that
Right.
form. And what I would point out is that, different people are different. They have different anatomies, so the best form for one person might not be the best form for another. Also, just the idea that it's useful to be able to squat in lots of different ways, because that's real world function. And each one of those teaches you a little bit of something about yourself. And with that greater awareness, there might be just like a general overall function. But, that being said, a lot of Kelly's stuff is great way to work on your mobility and all that stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I guess what impressed me about your stuff is you seem to consider the neural component in much greater depth. Respect, I think.
Yeah, there's kind of two ways to look at what's your limitation. Why do you have a limited range of motion? Is that an anatomical issue with your bones? Well, probably can't be changed so much. Is it a length issue with your muscles that maybe changes slowly over time? Is it like a neural inhibition thing where your brain just doesn't want to let you do it? That might change like that if you can get information in there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Sometimes I'll have like a stiff neck from who knows why. And I'll even like practice even when I'm driving, which probably isn't safe, but I'll be driving, 20-minute drive, and I'll have this really stiff neck or feeling really stiff. And I'll play little games with my eyes and move my head slightly. And as I'm moving my head to the left, I'll kind of look to the right, not to where it's uncomfortable, but just I do these Feldenkraisian things and these things I've learned from you. And I'll get out of the car after 20 minutes and I can move my neck again. So that stuff always seems super interesting to me.
That was my take on Feldenkrais as well. Not everyone is a high responder to this kind of really subtle, kind of mindful stuff, but I certainly was. I mean, you do these kind of slow, gentle movements that kind of feel like they should be doing nothing, and then when you're done, it's say something's really changed, and it's not anything getting longer or stronger. It's just you chilling out and getting out of your own way,
I love that. Yeah, I like the way you put that. Speaking of Moshe and some other guys, who are some people who have been majorly influential in your career?
Yeah, I would say I'd put Moshe up there. I'd listed Gray Cook and Mike Boyle, and I remember reading a lot of stuff about kettlebells. Dan John and Pavel and Eric Cobb, who developed the Z Health system. A lot of those people I would have objections now to some of the things they say, but it's still, I definitely learned something from them, pushed me in certain directions. Lots of PTs talking about pain science like Lorimer Mosley, and some of my friends online like Jason Silvernail and lots of people like that. More recently, Franz Bosch, I enjoy his books. He takes a kind of real complex systems perspective to sports training, so I like that stuff. I have a lot of influences, I would say, the yoga world, and I try to learn a little something from what all the different people are saying, and I assume that if there's something in common, that's probably an interesting thing to tune into.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it seems to be a good guide to go deeper in that direction.
Yeah, many different fingers pointing in the same direction. I'm going to look in that direction.
Awesome. You mentioned Lorimer Mosley. He's got a YouTube video. I think it was like a TED Talk or some type of talk at a conference. It's still one of my favorite talks I've ever listened to on YouTube. I think it's called Why Things Hurt or something like that.
Lorimer Mosley. TEDx talk. He tells his funny stories and very charming. And
yeah.
That guy's amazing. I've seen him talk many times.
Okay. So you're a big fan of hearing his stories.
And his writing, very, very consistent with my thinking about these things. Huge influence.
Awesome. How's playing with movement? That's your latest book. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, it's very much about what I was talking about before. The behavior of play and how it's helpful. And one of the meanings of play in the book is like, it's not just about, well, a lot of times people hear the word play and they kind of think of like hula hooping or doing things that are silly or childish or trivial or like regressing to childlike activities. It's not really about that. There's nothing wrong with having fun and doing that kind of stuff. But I'm using play in a slightly different sense, kind of like as a way of solving complex problems when you don't have a map or a recipe or a blueprint to get the job done. So you can imagine like a scientist or an artist or a business person struggling with a really complex problem and they don't know exactly how to solve it. What do? They start like playing around with different alternatives, kind of free associating, being curious, exploring. Getting into that type of a creative attitude, I think, is useful for many kinds of problem solving, including problem solving related to your body. Yeah. So I recommend, exploring what's interesting to you, getting involved in variable activities, not always just following recipes and prescriptions for fitness. Those things can be useful, but if you rely on them too much, you can kind of kill the creative spark that should be fueling your progress.
Awesome. Yeah, awesome. So I don't, you said kind of anti-prescription. I don't want to go back into the prescription mode, but if you were to categorize some basic human movements that someone could play with or want to play with for the rest of their life so they could be a healthy and happy human, what movements would you put in that movement pattern list?
Yeah, I mean, one way to look at it is it would be the kind of movements that you can vary a lot, that you see coming up over and over and over again. So if you watch, athletes move or dancers move, there's certain things that they're always doing, like these fundamental positions and postures and movement that keep coming up, squats and lunges. And like, I like the idea of that Dan John has in the strength training of kind of dividing movements up into squat, lunge, hip hinge, push, pull. I think those are useful, kind of basic, fundamental categories. I think he's also got carrying things in there.
Yep.
Another way to divide up movements is you can think in terms of locomotive movements like crawling and climbing and running. You can think of, level changes, again, the squats and lunges. I really like any kind of reaching movements and climbing movements and you could kind of take kind of a paleo perspective and think, what are the kinds of movements that in the natural world you would have to be doing a lot, just as you would if you were trying to decide what a chimp would need to do to stay healthy, who's living in your house. You would think, well, what do chimps do in the wild? And so you'd take them to the climbing gym and not the swimming pool if you wanted them to exercise well. So you could think in terms of locomotive activity. There's some carrying, there's some climbing, there's some throwing. So thinking in those kinds of terms is something I do a lot, and I think it can be useful.
I love it. And in some ways, we have that chimp is not just in our house, but like inside of us, right?
That chimp's right here.
Evolutionarily, kind of thing that we can tap into.
I'm a huge fan of climbing. I mean, where our ancestors built millions of years in the trees, and if you put babies on climbing walls, they can climb. And when you get on a climbing wall and you move around, you'll find yourself exercising everything you've got. I mean, there's no mobility that will be unused. There's no pushing or pulling movement that will be unused. I mean, it's like the full deal.
I love it. I think it was you who I remember putting a picture up on your blog and talking about it, or I think it was probably your blog, but I think it was the Pygmies, the Pygmy people or the Pygmy forest. I don't know if I'm saying that wrong.
Oh, no, the Twa people that climb. Well, they climb in a very strange way.
Yeah, the Twa people, but you pointed out not only their climbing abilities, but that because of that, they also had incredible ankle flexion ability, I think it was.
Well, these guys do is they basically learn how to walk up trees. So what do? They kind of grab the tree like this, and then they put their foot like that, and then they climb up the tree. And to do that, I'm not sure how they're doing it, with grabbing out their hands or with a strap or something. But to do that efficiently, you need massive ankle dorsiflexion. And so I think what the Post was saying, it was referring to a research paper, and it was saying, well, do these guys just genetically have more dorsiflexion, or is this something they develop because they use their bodies in a certain way from a young age. And I think the conclusion was they get that dorsiflexion just by using it at a young age when the body's really super adaptive. So it's kind of a use it or lose it thing.
Yeah.
Our structure really adapts to the demand that we put under it. But the caveat is it's really doing that adapting when you're young. And once you're older and your skeleton's developed, you're not going to change it that much.
That's interesting. It kind of leads me to a curiosity. Our 3-year-old son, he'll walk around the house, in all kinds of ways. So you talk about walking as a great movement pattern because you can vary it in
right.
seemingly infinite ways, but he'll walk around the house with his feet, with his toes, the front of his feet tucked under on top of his, and so I'm asking myself, and he's so comfortable and natural about it, and he'll just do it from time to time when he's just kind of walking around looking at stuff or playing with the cat. And I'm asking myself, like, can I bring that back into my repertoire? And right now it's like, I can't right now. Yeah.
Their bones are really far apart, and they're so flexible, and they can just do anything. And then at some point, the body's going to choose, their skeleton's going to choose one way to be, and then once it makes that choice, it's going to be kind of stuck with that.
Got it. So it'll be hard for me to relearn that.
No, I don't think you can relearn that, or if you do, it would take you quite a while. It'd be pretty painful.
Awesome. Hey, Todd. One of the things I've been bringing into the mix, and I don't know where this started, but it happened one day. I saw a Hacky Sack at the store, and I bought it. And so I've been bringing this into the mix. It's something I really like to do now. I try to play every day with somebody, anyone who will play with me. But I've noticed too in the strength world, if I'm working with a client or something, instead of doing like a bunch of kind of structured, mobility drills and such, I'll just say, hey, here's a Hacky Sack. Let's play Hacky Sack for a few minutes.
Yeah, I like that.
Thoughts on that?
Well, I like it. There's one of the ideas I talk about in the book is, the game is the teacher.
Yeah.
So, if you can there's a lot of games that if you play them, you'll learn a lot of stuff, even though you're not trying to learn it. So, just for example, soccer, you could, if you wanted to help people be better passers, you could have them do passing drills, or you could have them play a game where passing is really rewarded, like 3-on-1, and passing is the obvious solution. Or if you want people to be better dribbling skills, you could have them dribble through cones, or you could get them involved in a game where that really just demands good dribbling or encourages it or rewards it. So I think as much as possible, if you can get a game to teach someone to do something, do it, because it's more motivating, it's more fun, often more effective. Not always. You can't always find the right game for the right situation, and people need to want to play it. If someone doesn't want to play Hacky Sack, then you're stuck. But if they do, great.
Well, I think, I say, hey, are you open to this? And if they say no, I put it back in my pocket. Hey, I thought of like baseball too. Similarly, like someone asked me once, like, how do you get better at hitting a baseball? Well, I think it's arguably a really hard thing to do anyway. But my answer was like, the people who are good at hitting baseballs have probably seen 1 million or 2 million or 10 million more baseballs coming at them than you have. And they've seen balls coming at them their whole life, and it spoke to me that whole game is the teacher thing.
Yeah. Well, I've told you before, I'm kind of a pool geek. I like to, so I go to these pool forums, and people are like, oh, what's the right technique for your wrist? Or what exactly do you do with your wrist when you're putting it through? And some professionals showed up, and they say, I use the HAMB method. It's called hit a million balls. And don't worry about what's happening with your wrist. They're saying, I have no idea what my wrist is doing. You know how I developed the right wrist action? I hit a million balls. It's kind of, you can coach these things. There are some technical coaches, they can tell you what to do, but a lot of it's going to be intuitive and just doing it,
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that rings true, I think. Todd, thanks for your time today. I think this has been great. I think it's been an incredible encapsulation of a bunch of different things, and focus too on that play aspect. You've recently released that book, Playing with Movement. Where can someone get that book if they want to purchase it?
Yeah, I've got one called Guide to Better Movement. I've got one called Playing with Movement. You can find them both on Amazon by searching for those terms or searching for my name. And then I've got a blog at bettermovement.org where you can find links and information about the book and lots of blog articles I've written on this kind of stuff.
Awesome. Well, Todd, thank you for your time today. This has been amazing to me, and I think a lot of listeners will probably feel the same way.
Well, cool. Thanks a lot. I had fun.
Awesome. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
You too. Yeah, that was good.